Hello everyone, I am Vanish Signal. And before we start with some new stories, like and subscribe to the channel. Also comment down below from where you are watching this. Story 1, Waverly. Waverly, I was 24 the day I drove into Waverly, though I can't say with any certainty that I meant to. It was the tail end of a long weekend, and I'd been driving for hours with no destination, just trying to clear my head after a rough breakup and a worse week at work. I veered off the freeway to avoid a 3-car pileup that lit the sky behind me red. My GPS recalculated, rerouted me through back roads that wound like veins across farmland and fading towns. Then I saw the sign. Welcome to Waverly, founded 1831. The road dipped and curved into a narrow valley, and there it was. The town looked like something out of a postcard. Brick storefronts with striped awnings, an old stone clock tower ticking in the center of a roundabout, a church with white steeples just behind a row of tidy houses. Everything looked intentional, too clean, too preserved. The kind of place where the mailman still knows your name and every front porch has a rocking chair. People waved, not like strangers, but like they recognized me. A woman in a sundress watering petunias. 3 kids riding their bikes in lazy circles on the sidewalk. A man smoking a pipe on a porch, nodding slowly as I passed. The friendliness made me uneasy. I didn't stop, just kept my hands at 10 and 2, rolling through the town square as the same old-timey tune drifted faintly from somewhere I couldn't place. 15 minutes later, I should have been back on the highway. But the road didn't end. It didn't merge. It didn't curve toward the freeway again. Instead, the buildings kept coming. Different names, different facades, but eerily familiar layouts. Another gas station with a flickering open sign. Another school with red bricks and green shutters. Another diner with the same 3 cars parked out front. That's when I pulled over. The heat gauge on my car was inching up, and the dashboard clock had been stuck at 3:12 since I left the freeway. I parked in front of a small corner pharmacy with big front windows and a neon cross that buzzed softly. Inside, it smelled like bleach and fresh paper, spotless, silent, not even a radio playing. Behind the counter stood a girl, mid-20s maybe, with neatly braided hair and a fixed smile. Her name tag read EMILY in faded black print. Need something? She asked, without blinking. Yeah, I said, suddenly unsure of what I was even doing. Just directions. I think I missed the turnoff for Highway 17 and she didn't answer right away. Just stared at me, her smile never shifting. Then she said, "You passed it, but you're welcome to stay." Her voice was flat, rehearsed, like she was reading from a cue card. Something about the way she said it chilled me. I thanked her, stepped back out into the street, and got in my car. The GPS was useless. Just a gray screen with a blinking blue dot and the words, "No signal." I tried my phone. No service, no bars, not even Wi-Fi. Like the town was sealed off from everything else. I drove, fast. I took every left, every right, every gravel road I could find. But Waverly didn't end. I passed the same buildings again and again. The same bakery with its crooked "Help Wanted" sign. The same barbershop with scissors painted on the door. And always, the same pale man in the same gray coat, standing at the same corner. Still, watching, waiting. Eventually, out of sheer exhaustion, I stopped. I'd reached the edge of what looked like a cemetery. Old stones, crooked and weathered, rows vanishing into a patch of woods. And just beyond the fence, another sign. Welcome to Waverly, founded 1831. But this time, there was something new beneath it. Population, you. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. Parked the car behind the cemetery, curled up in the back seat with my jacket as a pillow. I kept the doors locked and the windows cracked, but the air inside turned stale fast. Every noise outside, every rustle of wind, every shifting tree branch sounded like footsteps. I sat upright more than once, convinced someone was walking just out of view. But when I looked, it was always empty. The town was quiet, too quiet, and not the kind of quiet you expect in the early hours of the morning. It was the kind that felt layered, as if something beneath the silence was waiting to move. At dawn, I tried the GPS again. Still nothing. My phone had no signal, and the battery was draining at a pace that didn't make sense, even with everything off. It was like something nearby was pulling at it, siphoning power without permission. I turned it off completely and stepped out of the car. The cemetery was exactly as I'd left it. Silent, damp with dew. The graves leaning in odd directions, like they were listening, or worse, whispering. The stones had no dates, just names. And some of those names matched people I knew. Old classmates, a teacher, a girl I used to date. I walked back into town with the growing weight that I wasn't supposed to be here. That I'd stepped into something closed off from the rest of the world. I hoped I could find someone, anyone, in a position of authority who could give me answers. But Waverly didn't have a town hall, no police station, no fire department. Just row after row of pristine storefronts, shuttered shops, and houses that looked lived in but empty. It was like someone had built a movie set and forgotten to cast anyone real. I passed the diner again. Its windows were fogged, though it hadn't rained. I stepped closer and peered inside. The same woman in the same uniform stood behind the counter. She hadn't moved. A man with a paper still sat in the corner booth. The same man, same position, same fold in the newspaper. Another man stirred a cup of coffee with rhythmic precision, his spoon circling endlessly like a metronome, keeping time for something unseen. I watched him for nearly a full minute. His hand never wavered. Across the street, I saw him again. The pale man in the gray coat, always standing in the same place. His face slack, eyes fixed forward, mouth slightly parted as though he were waiting to speak, but had forgotten how. I walked past him, intentionally slow. His head turned with mine, tracking me. His neck moved just a second behind, like a delayed signal. Still no blink. "What is this place?" I asked him, my voice louder than I meant it to be. He opened his mouth, a slow inhale like a dying breeze crawling through dry leaves. But no words came. I took a step back. He didn't follow, just watched. I ran. My legs carried me 2 blocks before I stopped at a school. Waverly Elementary. The sign was freshly painted, too fresh to have any history. Inside, the hallway lights buzzed with electricity. A clock above the main office was stuck at 3:12. Again. I checked my watch. It was 3:12. The same time it had been yesterday. The same time my phone had frozen. A child's drawing on a bulletin board showed a house labeled Home, with 5 stick figures out front, all with their faces violently scratched out. The word "stay" was written in the corner, over and over, in tiny crayon script. I opened a nearby classroom door. Inside were 20 children, sitting in perfect rows at their desks. The chalkboard held the same math problems I remembered from 4th grade. An apple sat on the teacher's desk. Nothing moved. Then I stepped in. My shoe squeaked, and every single child turned to look at me. They had no faces. Smooth, blank skin stretched over their heads like wax. No mouths, no eyes, no expression. Just pale ovals pointing in my direction. I couldn't breathe. I backed out, tripping over the threshold, and slammed the door shut. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so violently, I dropped the keys twice before jamming them into the ignition. I peeled out of the lot and drove, any direction, all directions. But every road curved back into town. I passed the diner again, the school, the gray-coated man. Again, again, again. There was no exit. That night, I parked behind the pharmacy. The street was empty. My headlights reflected in the same windows I'd passed that morning. I didn't expect to see anyone now. I just watched. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the lights in the town began to shut off, one by one, block by block, like a fuse being pulled through the grid. Everything darkened in perfect sequence. Then, from somewhere in the black, came footsteps, heavy, measured, closer with each second. Then, a knock on my window. I didn't move at first. Just sat in the driver's seat, breathing shallow, my eyes locked forward while fog crept across the inside of the windshield. My fingers had gone numb around the steering wheel. Then the second knock came. Slower, heavier, as if it expected an answer. My heart thumped so loudly, I thought it might drown out the silence pressing against the windows. I turned my head, every muscle tense, and looked out into the dark. Nothing. No person. No movement. The street light above glowed weakly, and beyond its reach, only the suggestion of trees and fog. But I knew something had been there. Maybe still was. I kept the engine running until sunrise. I didn't dare shut it off. The thought of being in that car without a barrier between me and Waverly was unbearable. My hand stayed on the gear shift the entire time, ready to bolt, even though I knew there was nowhere to go. When the first blush of dawn lit the rooftops, the town looked unchanged, perfectly still, as if the world had forgotten to press play again. The diner's neon sign flickered weakly, and inside, the same people sat in the same exact positions as the day before. Or was it the day before that? I had begun to lose track. It was like the hours had melted into each other. Determined to find some kind of escape, or at least a crack in the illusion, I drove again. This time, I tracked every street name, every intersection. But they didn't make sense. Maple, Sycamore, Elm, they repeated. Not just similar names, but the exact same blocks. Houses with the same curtains. Shops with windows dressed in mannequins that didn't blink. But that didn't mean they weren't watching. One hardware store had an open sign hanging in the window, but it was reversed, mirrored from inside as if someone had placed it with the intention of being seen from another place altogether. I kept passing mailboxes marked with the name Thatcher. It wasn't a neighborhood. It was a loop wearing different costumes. Then something new appeared. A narrow alley beside the bookstore. I was sure it hadn't been there yesterday. Or maybe I just hadn't noticed. Maybe it hadn't wanted to be noticed. It was thin, with buildings on either side leaning inward like they were conspiring. I left the car running and walked in. The alley swallowed sound. My footsteps disappeared into the stone, and even my breath felt muffled. Halfway through, I saw it. A rusted metal door with peeling black letters that read, Municipal Archive, Waverly District. Inside, the air was a mix of damp paper, cold metal, and something else. Something medicinal, like old hospitals. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, flickering just slightly, and long shelves stretched down the room, stacked with file boxes, ledgers, cassette tapes, even reel-to-reel machines. Polaroids were pinned to corkboards, their colors faded and warped. In the back was a desk, and on it sat a large leather-bound ledger, open to a page titled Current Residents. My name was there. My full name, in tidy, mechanical handwriting. Under arrival date was the day I'd entered the town. Under departure date, the space was blank. I flipped backward. Hundreds of names, some scratched out, some not. A few repeated. One name stood out. Emily. No last name. I thought of the girl in the pharmacy, the one who smiled too long and blinked too little. I turned another page and stopped cold. The next section wasn't names, but drawings. Scribbled in thick black crayon, childlike depictions of the school, the diner, the cemetery. Every figure had a blank face, just white ovals. At the top, in uneven handwriting, someone had written, "They never leave. They just change." I heard whispering then, soft, overlapping voices that formed no words I could understand, but felt like I should. The source was the tape archive. I walked toward the shelves, heart pounding, picked up the nearest cassette, labeled with today's date. One word scrawled on the label in red ink. Final. I stumbled back into the daylight, or what passed for daylight in Waverly. The sky had gone dark again, despite the hour. Clouds thick as oil rolled overhead. The streetlights had already flicked on, though the sun hadn't set. The town was shifting, narrower, leaning inward. The buildings loomed, watching, remembering. I climbed into the car, shoved the cassette into the ancient player, and listened. Static at first, then a voice. My voice. I shouldn't have come here. Waverly isn't a place. It's a design, a cycle, a mechanism. It watches, it learns, it waits. If you're hearing this, you've already been chosen. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll forget. Maybe you'll fold into it like the rest of them. Maybe you won't even notice when it happens. Maybe... The recording stopped. The car engine sputtered, died. The lights went out, and from the rear window came another knock. Slower, closer, like it knew exactly who I was now. End of story. Story 2. Marrowick. There's a stretch of Route 6 where the woods thicken and the road buckles, like the asphalt is trying to crawl back into the earth. It's the kind of place where even daylight seems reluctant to hang around. That's where I found Marrowick. I'd been driving home from a long weekend at a cabin with some friends, already an hour off schedule. I'd taken a wrong turn near an unmarked intersection, one of those barely there dirt roads that only exist to confuse you. My GPS lost its signal around mile marker 112. I figured I'd backtrack, but then I saw a faint path through the trees, and something about it made me keep driving. The air felt denser. The forest pressed closer, like the road itself wanted me to keep going. The town didn't appear so much as emerge. The first sign of it was literal. A hand-painted wooden plank nailed crookedly to a tree trunk, half choked by moss. It read, Marrowick, founded 1803, still watching. The lettering was uneven, and the paint looked fresher than it should have. I muttered the words under my breath, hoping they'd lose some of their weight if I spoke them aloud. They didn't. If anything, the name seemed to echo slightly after I said it, like something heard me. I rolled forward, tires crunching gravel as the road narrowed into a thin main street, flanked by buildings that leaned inward like conspirators. Marrowick looked like a ghost town without the decay. The wood on the houses was worn but solid. The shingles looked old but intact. The windows were all shut, some boarded, some curtain drawn. I passed a barber shop with scissors etched into the doorframe, a library with rusted bars on the windows, and a chapel whose doors had been sealed with thick wooden planks, nailed in an X. Then I began to notice the carvings. Eyes, everywhere. Not painted, cut into wood, stone, and even the metal siding of an old mechanic's garage. Some were simple, just outlines. Others had disturbing detail, with irises and lashes and tiny carved reflections. All of them looked in different directions, except when I passed. Then they all seemed to follow. I parked in front of what must have been the town's inn. The Marrow House. Read a swinging sign shaped like a spine. The building loomed over the others, 3 stories tall, windows crooked, walls sagging slightly, as though it had exhaled and hadn't remembered to breathe back in. A single yellow light flickered in the front parlor window. I hesitated, but something made me go in. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the growing weight in my chest telling me I wouldn't find a way out until I did. The door creaked open, but no bell rang. The air inside was musty and oddly warm, like a basement sealed too long. The front desk sat beneath a mounted elk head, its glass eyes cracked. Behind the desk was a man in a dusty 3-piece suit, his skin so thin and wrinkled it looked like sun-baked parchment. He didn't move when I entered, only when I spoke. "Do you have a room?" He blinked, nodded slowly, took a key from the wall, number 3, and placed it in my hand. His fingers were dry and cold, like they'd never held blood. "No charge," he said in a voice that creaked like floorboards. "Just don't draw the curtains." I paused. Why not? But he had already turned away, vanishing into the back like smoke. Room 3 was at the end of a long, narrow hallway lined with portraits. Dozens of them. Every face had been scratched out, some lightly, others with violent gashes, as if someone had clawed them in a frenzy. I couldn't tell if the damage had been deliberate or desperate. My key worked with a loud click. The room was small and untouched. Neat bed, white sheets, single chair by the window. The window looked out onto the square, and beyond that, the tree line, unmoving and unnaturally still. I dropped my bag and checked my phone again. No signal. No Wi-Fi. Even the screen brightness flickered for a moment before stabilizing. I sat on the bed and reached for the nightstand. Inside was a single, nondescript book. No title. No cover art. I flipped it open and found page after page of names. All handwritten. All in the same careful penmanship. Hundreds of names. Maybe thousands. All of them crossed out with a single black line. Except the last. The last name was mine. And it wasn't crossed out. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment I was staring out the window, trying to make sense of the place I'd wandered into. And the next, I was waking up in a thick, heavy dark. No sunlight filtered in. No street lamps glowed. Just a thick blackness that seemed to press against every wall like a living thing. The room felt different, heavier, like the air had sunk. It was colder too, wet and dense, with a faint tang of metal in every breath, like rusted iron or pennies left too long in your palm. I pushed myself up, and the bed groaned under my weight, as if straining not to wake whatever might be lurking nearby. I looked at the window. The town square was gone. In its place, the glass reflected my room. But something was wrong. It wasn't a mirror image. The angles were distorted, skewed just enough to make you doubt your own perception. The bed was positioned differently. The chair had moved. And sitting in that chair was something. A presence shaped like a man, but absent of all detail, a human void. It didn't move or speak. It just was. I blinked hard. When I looked again, the square had returned. The dim outline of trees, rooftops bathed in early haze, the empty street. But the chill didn't leave my bones. I left the room. The hallway was warped, too. The portraits that lined the walls were different, restored in some way. The scratches and peeling paint had been cleaned up, replaced by fresh varnish and unfamiliar faces. Some of them were people I knew. A teacher from 3rd grade. A girl who sat 2 rows over in high school algebra. Their eyes followed me with precision, and their mouths moved, not speaking, but twitching and stretching in grotesque imitation of conversation. Some were sewn shut. Some were open wide in eternal silence. Downstairs, the lobby was deserted. The elk head that loomed over the desk yesterday was gone. In its place stood a tall mirror, its surface blackened with soot or ash. I reached out and wiped a streak with my sleeve. The reflection showed the front door behind me, open wide, gaping into the fog. A tall figure stood just outside the threshold, motionless, watching. I spun around. The door was shut tight, bolted from the inside. That was enough. I had to leave. The street outside was wrapped in a dense morning fog. Merriwick was suffocatingly still. No bird calls, no rustling wind, just the crunch of my own footsteps on the gravel. I turned toward the road I'd arrived on, only to find it gone. Where it had been, the town stretched further inward. New streets, narrower alleys, buildings I hadn't seen before. The town was reshaping itself, drawing me in. Windows were painted over, doors had no handles. A post office leaned at a bad angle, its sign barely attached. Every surface was etched with eyes, carved into wood, stone, even the pavement under my feet, watching me, following me. I could feel it, the same way you feel someone staring from behind a curtain. The library stood at the end of one narrow path, its barred windows open like arms. The door hung ajar. Inside, the air was thicker still, soaked with the stink of mildew and the waxy tang of melted candles. Dust floated like it had never been disturbed. The shelves were full, yet the books were blank. No titles, just arcane symbols scorched into the spines. Symbols that made my stomach churn just to look at them. In the center of the room stood a woman dressed in jet black. She didn't turn. She was placing books back on the shelves, books that vanished as soon as they left her hand. "Looking for something?" she asked, still shelving. I hesitated. "A way out." She let out a short, brittle laugh. "Nobody leaves until they're finished." "Finished with what?" "You'll know, when it happens." I took a step back. The shelves narrowed behind me, closing in. I could feel the space trying to shrink, to trap me. I backed away, careful not to turn my back. Once outside, I noticed the sun. It had risen, but not in the east. It was climbing from the north. Then I saw him, the man from the inn, the one who'd handed me the key. He was standing in the middle of the street, perfectly still. His head tilted slightly, a crooked grin on his face. But his eyes were gone. In their place were carvings, and they were mine. I ran. I didn't care where. I just needed distance from that man, that smile, those impossible eyes. My feet hit the ground harder with every step, the mist curling around my ankles like it was trying to hold me back. The streets blurred past, each one looking more alien than the last. The town didn't just feel abandoned now. It felt sentient, as though the buildings had lungs and the roads could think. Every alley I turned into narrowed behind me. Every door I tried was locked, or worse, led somewhere else entirely. At one point, I opened what looked like a hardware store door and found myself staring into a cemetery lit by candlelight. A cold wind rolled out of it, carrying whispers too faint to understand. I slammed it shut and kept moving. My lungs burned, not just from exertion, but from the air itself. It was getting thicker, heavier, tainted with something sour and chemical, like a cleaning product that had turned bad. I found myself in a part of town I hadn't seen before. Houses stacked close together, each with curtains drawn tight and doors that looked melted at the edges. Some houses didn't have doors at all, just voids yawning into nothing. The silence was unbearable until it wasn't. From somewhere behind the buildings came a sound, scraping, dragging, followed by a low, rhythmic thudding, like someone hammering slowly, deliberately. I crouched behind a rusted trash bin and waited. The sound came closer. My breath caught. Then it stopped. Silence returned. A few seconds passed. Then a light flickered on in an upstairs window, a sickly green glow like algae on water. That's when I heard my name, whispered, not spoken. It came from multiple directions at once, down the street, above me, behind the fence. Like the fog itself was speaking. I clamped a hand over my mouth. Then the whispers stopped as suddenly as they started, and I knew it was a cue, a signal. Something wanted me to move. Something was orchestrating this. I ducked into a narrow passage between two buildings, squeezing past rotting boards and vines that pulsed faintly, like they were breathing. The space opened into a courtyard choked with weeds and rusted furniture. In the center was a dry fountain filled with bones, small ones, dozens of them, some bleached white, others fresh enough to stink. Nearby, toys were scattered, wooden dolls with their heads twisted off, a stuffed rabbit missing an eye and soaked with mildew. As I backed away, my foot caught on something hard. I looked down. A child's shoe, still tied, still warm. I dropped it and ran. The houses watched me with shuttered windows. I made it to a fence and scrambled over, tearing my arm open on a nail. I didn't stop. Blood streaked down to my elbow, and I used it to mark walls as I passed, leaving a trail in case I had to come back. God help me if I had to come back. One of the walls I marked hissed softly after my blood touched it, as if tasting. Eventually, I stumbled into what looked like an old train station, abandoned, covered in ivy, but real. It had a stillness that felt different, like it was outside the rules the rest of the town followed. Inside were benches and dust-covered signage, the remnants of schedules that hadn't mattered in decades. Faded posters advertised destinations that didn't exist. A single train car sat on the dead tracks, its windows dark. The door was open. I stepped inside. It was clean, untouched. Everything was in place, as if waiting for passengers that never arrived. At the far end sat an old woman in a conductor's uniform. She didn't move. Her eyes were closed, her hands folded in her lap. On the seat beside her was a brass pocket watch, still ticking despite its cracked face. "I'm ready," I said, not even knowing why. She opened her eyes. "Then sit. The town has what it needs. For now." Her voice was dry, almost mechanical, like she'd said the line 1,000 times before. I sat. The train didn't move, but the town did. Outside the window, the platform twisted. Buildings reformed. A street folded into itself like an origami shape collapsing. The fog thickened and took shape, briefly becoming a face that watched us passively, then dissolving into vapor. The train car remained still, but the world outside was transforming. I realized then this wasn't an escape. This was an intermission, and I wasn't a passenger. I was cargo. The church bells rang, sharp and hollow, even though no one pulled the rope. The sound was off, delayed, echoing too long, like it passed through water before reaching the air. I followed it, hoping the tolls would lead somewhere real, somewhere solid. But Merriwick didn't work like that. The streets changed behind me with each step forward. Buildings slid out of sight. Trees twisted and leaned in. The town had no center, no anchor. It was a maze built from memory and intent, reshaping itself with every glance. It wanted me confused. It wanted me lost. At the far edge of the square, I found the church, a hulking shape of dark stone, slate-roofed, with narrow stained glass windows glowing faint red from within. Each pane pulsed softly like a heartbeat. As I stepped through the heavy door, warmth flooded my skin. Too warm, like stepping into a fever dream. The air pressed in, thick and damp. The pews were empty, except for a line of identical men in black coats. Each sat upright, perfectly still, eyes closed, hands folded as if in prayer or waiting. They didn't breathe. They didn't blink. But the sound of clocks ticking, dozens, maybe hundreds, filled the space. It grew louder with every step, a tidal wave of time crashing forward. Behind the altar stood a pulpit carved from something that looked too smooth to be wood and too porous to be stone. Bone, maybe. Behind it stood a woman, the same one I'd seen in the library, now cloaked in a veil made from what looked like woven hair. It hung to her chest, hiding her face. "You've seen too much," she said. Her voice didn't echo, but it cut through the ticking. I opened my mouth, but I couldn't speak. It was as if I'd swallowed ash. My tongue stuck to my teeth, my throat burned. She raised a single hand, and every man in every pew opened his eyes at once. Their irises weren't right. Geometric, fractal patterns spun endlessly inside them, like kaleidoscopes locked on a loop. The ticking stopped. That silence hit me like a blow to the chest. "You think you came here by accident?" she asked. "You were drawn, not summoned, not forced, just guided. That's how Marrowick works. It chooses the ones closest to breaking. All of you are fragments, splintered, searching. You carry pieces of things too heavy to hold, regrets, secrets, loss, and that's how the town feeds. It takes what you can't let go." I tried to speak again, to plead, but my legs gave out beneath me. The floor caught me like a net, soft and too forgiving. I wasn't sure if I was sitting, lying down, or falling. "You'll stay," she said, her voice colder now, "until something worse finds its way in and takes your place. The cycle keeps balance." The world blurred. My vision shrank into tunnels. I blacked out. When I woke, I was in the inn again. The sun slanted through the curtains in warm gold. My backpack sat by the door, zipped and ready. The streets outside were calm, normal. Children played hopscotch in the square. An old man swept a porch. The sky was blue. I didn't talk to anyone. I just left. No one stopped me. No one looked up. The road was right where it had always been. I drove until the fuel gauge blinked red. I reached a gas station in the next town over and asked the clerk about Marrowick. She frowned. Never heard of it. I checked my phone. GPS froze. The Maps app stalled, then glitched. No records, no routes. It was like the town had never existed. I couldn't even retrace the turns I took. My memory grew slippery. Parts of it already felt like dreams. Back home, time passed. A few weeks at first, then a few months. I settled back into routines. I worked, I cleaned, I slept. But sometimes, just before sleep, I hear the bells. Distant, faint, like they're underwater, dragging through fog. Sometimes I see reflections that don't match. People in mirrors that aren't me. Shadows that follow a beat too late. And sometimes, on the edge of crowds, I spot someone still, watching. And every now and then, I catch myself wondering if I ever left, or if Marrowick just decided to follow me out. By the time the sun fully cleared the jagged rooftops of Marrowick, the town had turned itself inside out. I could no longer tell where the main road had once been. Now it was a broken artery, looping back into itself like some impossible geometry. Buildings shifted when I wasn't looking. Windows blinked shut. Even the birds, if they ever existed here, had stopped pretending. This place had no rules I understood. Only one thing remained consistent. I was being watched. I wandered until my feet ached, and my thoughts began to unravel. Every alley whispered my name in a different voice. Sometimes it was my mother's. Sometimes a teacher. Once it was me, my voice calling from behind a shuttered window. I ran to it, flung the frame open, and found nothing but a black wall inches from the glass. I slammed it shut and leaned against the sill, my breath shallow and fast. That's when I heard the bell. A slow, hollow chime rang through the fog. Once, twice, then silence. I followed the sound, half-dazed, until I reached what passed for a town square. There, in the center, stood a church that hadn't been there before. Gothic and cracked, its steeple twisted toward the sky like a broken finger. The front doors were open wide, and inside, a red light pulsed like a heartbeat. I didn't want to enter. Every nerve in my body screamed to turn around. But I was done pretending that reason mattered here. I stepped inside. The air was thick, cloying. Rows of pews stretched into the dark, each one holding figures wrapped in shadow. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their attention locking onto me. At the front of the church stood the woman from the library, arms raised. "Your story ends here," she said, her voice echoing far beyond the walls. "Not in death, in understanding." The congregation turned as one. Dozens of faces I recognized, people from my past, from dreams, from memories I hadn't thought were real. They began to speak in unison, one word repeated over and over. "Remember?" The walls peeled back, not physically, but in perception. I saw things, layers behind reality. I saw my own life rendered in fragile threads, stitched into Marowic's design like a tapestry fraying at the edges. Every decision I'd ever made, every regret, every silence and turning away, they were part of this place. This was not a town, it was a reckoning. And then I saw more. I saw the town not just as it was, but as it had been. A shimmering, impossible city that existed beyond the margins of maps. I saw its origins. A gathering place for the forgotten, a convergence of unresolved memory. Marowick wasn't built. It was summoned, birthed from the minds of people like me. People who carried too much weight in their hearts and left too many truths unspoken. The woman stepped down from the pulpit and knelt beside me. "You've seen it now," she said gently, almost kindly. "You've seen what you are. That's all we needed." I dropped to my knees. My hands sank into the stone floor like it was sand, warm and pulsing. She pressed something into my palm. A mirror cracked through the center. My reflection stared back, no distortion, no horror. Just me, tired, real. But behind my image, for the briefest moment, I saw her face, my sister's. Lost so long ago, I'd buried the memory with careful hands. Her smile flickered and was gone. When I woke up, I was back in my car, parked on the edge of a field. No town behind me, no road signs, just a long stretch of highway and the rising sun. My hands were empty. But I remembered everything, not just the town, but what it had shown me. I remembered the conversations I'd avoided, the apologies I'd never spoken, the faces I chose to forget. I remembered my sister's laughter, the way she'd squeeze my hand when she was scared. And I remembered the last time I saw her, standing in the road, eyes full of fear just before everything changed. Marowick was gone. But it had done its work. And I knew, without a doubt, that someday someone else would find it. Because towns like that don't disappear. They wait. And they remember you too. End of story. Story 3. The hollow hours. It started with the call log. Dispatch received the 911 from a landline that hadn't been in service for over 2 decades, traced back to the 3rd floor of Ashfield Memorial, a state psychiatric hospital decommissioned in 1997 after a fire in the East Wing and a string of unexplained patient deaths. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the line came alive. No dial tone, no static, just a thin, gurgling whisper, like breath being drawn through water. The operator on duty, a 10-year veteran, said she felt cold breath on the back of her neck the moment the line connected. It lasted 17 seconds. No voice, just the sound, repeating like lungs struggling to remember how to breathe. Protocol flagged it as a false alarm, likely a glitch in the old copper lines. Still, the location was logged, and a unit was dispatched. I was one of the responding officers. The hospital squats in the woods off Route 39, behind a curtain of trees so thick it swallows sound. You don't see it until you're already too close. The building is a brutalist nightmare. Gray concrete and narrow windows, rust streaks like blood drip down its face. The gate was still locked, the chains rusted shut. We cut through them and stepped into silence. The air was still and heavy. Inside, it was worse. The dust clung to everything in a kind of still motion, like it had been waiting for us to stir it. Wheelchairs lay overturned in the hallway, their wheels slightly turned as if stopped mid-sprint. Files littered the ground, yellowed and brittle, like leaves in a dead forest. The reception desk had collapsed inward, the kind of damage that suggests violence, not time. We moved slowly, each footstep a small betrayal of the quiet. The elevators were out, so we took the stairs. The higher we climbed, the more we felt it. The wrongness in the air, not just old building decay. This was like walking into a thought you weren't supposed to think. 3rd floor, West Wing, room 316. We found it at the end of a hall lined with patient doors, most hanging off their hinges. When we opened the door, the temperature dropped. The room was bare. Peeling walls, mold streaking the ceiling, but in the center was a wooden chair, turned toward the far wall. A rotary phone lay beside it, its receiver slightly lifted from the cradle. The cord slithered through a hole in the wall, pulled taut as if it had crawled there itself. The phone was warm to the touch, not room temperature, fever warm. Behind the chair, someone had scratched a single phrase into the plaster hundreds of times. It's still 2:13, not written, carved, deep enough that flakes of paint and drywall curled on the floor like fingernail shavings. The rookie with me, Torres, backed up and nearly fell over a stack of folders piled neatly beside the bed. They hadn't been there when we came in. I picked one up and flipped it open. The patient name was Officer D. Mercer. Committed, July 1995. Diagnoses: delusional episodes, chronic hallucinations, severe insomnia, temporal dislocation. There was a photo paperclipped to the inside. It was me, or someone identical to me, wearing a badge, staring directly into the camera with eyes that looked weeks past sleep. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then the phone rang. Just once. One long, echoing ring that didn't seem to come from the device, but from the walls themselves. A sound so deep it made my teeth ache. We didn't speak. We just ran. The hallway was longer than before. I swear it. The stairwell had shifted, moved from one end of the hall to the other. The lights flickered. Our radios hissed static laced with what sounded like a voice trying to form. Downstairs, the lobby was no longer abandoned. The overturned desk was upright. The floor shone like it had just been waxed. But there were no people, only silence. The front doors were gone, not shut. Gone, as if the wall had never been broken to make them. We turned and heard the ding of the elevator behind us. No power, but the doors slid open smooth as anything. Inside, there were no floor numbers, only years. 1989, 1993, 1995, 1997, 2023. A red light glowed above 1995. Torres looked at me, his voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell is this place?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because I knew. This wasn't about investigating a call. This was about returning one. And we had just stepped into the hollow hour where time forgets to move forward. I should have stopped Torres from stepping in, but I didn't. The moment his boot touched the elevator floor marked 1995. The doors slid shut behind us. No sound, no groan of aging mechanics. Just seamless silence, like the walls were holding their breath. The light dimmed until we stood in a box of thickening gray. Then the floor gave a subtle lurch. Not the clunk of machinery engaging, but a sinking sensation, as if the entire hospital had bent itself inward to swallow us. For a few seconds, I swear we weren't in any place. Not underground, not in time. Just unanchored, weightless in a dark, thinking void. When the doors opened, the world had changed. It wasn't like we'd traveled to a different floor. We had dropped through time's crust into a memory preserved in static. The hallway ahead gleamed with new linoleum, white-painted walls unmarred by grime or graffiti. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly above us. The air carried that specific scent hospitals always had. Sanitizer, sweat, something metallic and sweet. On the wall hung laminated posters about tuberculosis screenings and how to identify intrusive thoughts. Ashfield wasn't dead, it was alive, and it didn't know it had died. A nurse passed in front of us, wearing a starched uniform and blank expression. Her eyes didn't track us. No recognition, just robotic motion. Another followed behind, pushing a cart loaded with gauze, glass syringes, a clipboard. Everyone moved smoothly, like actors caught in an endless rehearsal. Orderlies shuffled past with hunched shoulders and unfocused eyes. One nodded at us. Torres whispered, "They can see us." I wasn't convinced. They moved like clock hands, predictable, automated, dreamlike. This was no reenactment. It was a loop, a system running long after the operators had abandoned it, a ritual still reciting itself. Room numbers blurred past, 310, 312, 314. When we reached 316, it hit me with the weight of déjà vu wrapped in dread. The door was ajar. No lights on inside, but I could feel a presence like static before a storm. We stepped in. The room was simple. Peeling wallpaper, a single bed, a scuffed linoleum floor. No carvings this time, no chair, just a rotary phone on the nightstand, and a man sitting on the bed with his head in his hands. He looked up, and it was me, or what I'd become. Paler, hollow-eyed, every bone in my face sharp as broken glass, a version of myself that had stayed too long. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything: recognition, regret, resignation. He reached for the phone. Lights flickered. The room warped. Gravity went crooked for a moment, and I swayed, barely catching myself. My stomach lurched like I'd just stepped off a cliff and hadn't landed. "I remember this," I whispered. But that wasn't true until just then. The memory had been installed into me like a virus. Me sitting in this room, phone ringing with something horrible on the other end. Something that knew my name, my badge number, my dreams. Something that called through time. The other me extended the phone, slowly. His fingers were trembling. He was afraid. But it wasn't fear of the unknown. It was the certainty of what came next. I backed away. He insisted, pushing it into my hands like it was mine all along. When I took the receiver, the room constricted. The walls rippled inward, folding like paper. The air was thick and buzzing with invisible wings. A voice came through. "You're late." It sounded wrong. Too dry, like it had spent centuries buried in stone before forcing its way to the surface. The hour is always 2:13. That's when you died. My ears rang. My vision tunneled. I couldn't breathe. Torres snatched the phone from my hands and slammed it back into the cradle. The sound died. Instantly, the room stabilized. But the other me was gone, not fled, erased. I looked at Torres. "We have to go, now." He didn't argue. We ran. We reached the elevator and the panel had changed. No floor numbers, just years. 1944, 1979, 213. That number repeated over and over, each instance flashing red like a warning. The button labels flickered between numbers and words. Return, loop, beginning, never. We didn't touch anything. The elevator began to move. When the doors opened, the hospital was no longer past or present. It was wrong. Completely. Hallways bent upward. Light fixtures spun slowly like weather vanes. The tile floor had dissolved into patterns that bled upward into the ceiling. Numbers dripped down the walls, melting into one another. Everything leaned toward a central point in the distance. Torres whispered, "We're inside the time." And he was right. We had entered something older than memory, something built out of a moment that refused to die. We hadn't just answered a call. We had crossed into the place it came from. And now, time was folding the script around us. Torres pressed the elevator button. Nothing happened. We stood in the glow of the 1995 light, feeling the hum in the walls, the weight of the air. I could taste copper. When the doors finally opened, the interior looked like a hospital elevator from a different time. Linoleum floor with no scuffs, white walls gone yellow with age, and the smell. God, the smell. Antiseptic and rot, sweet like decaying fruit. We stepped inside. No sound, no motion. Just the red light above 1995, pulsing like a heartbeat. The doors shut without us pushing anything. There were no buttons inside, no emergency stop, no floor panel. Just us and a reflective strip of metal on the wall, warped enough to show us, but not clearly. Our reflections didn't move exactly in sync. Torres noticed it first. His head tilted one way, but the reflection didn't follow. It stared straight ahead, eyes wide and unblinking. We didn't talk about it. The elevator jolted once and began to move, not up, not down, but somewhere else. The numbers on the panel blinked erratically. For a second I saw 1901, then 2027, then, and finally, nothing at all. When the doors opened, the hallway beyond was cast in green emergency light. The ceiling had pipes running along it like veins. We stepped out, and the elevator was gone. No doors behind us, just wall. This place, wherever we were, it was a snapshot of the hospital, but twisted. The patient room numbers were the same, but everything was wrong. Room 304 had no door, just an open space where dozens of clocks hung on strings, all ticking, none in sync. In 310, we found a child's bed and a mobile of surgical scissors hanging above it. In 312, there was a man in a hospital gown standing in the corner facing the wall. His mouth was open and his tongue was missing. Written on the wall in blood was a time, 2:13. Torres started muttering under his breath, and I had to pull him back from the doorframe. His eyes were locked on something down the corridor I couldn't see. He kept whispering, "We're not supposed to be here." We're not supposed to be here. I grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him. He blinked, like waking from a dream. Then we heard it again, the phone. Not ringing this time, dialing. Somewhere down the hall, we followed the sound, past collapsing rooms and empty wheelchairs turned inward. The source was a nurse's station with a rotary phone spinning on its own. It stopped, lifted the receiver with no hand, and I swear to God, I heard my own voice on the other end, asking for help. Then silence. Torres backed away. "We have to end this," he said. "How?" I asked. He pointed toward a stairwell that hadn't been there a moment ago. "We go deeper." He was right. There was no way back, only further in. So we went. The stairs down to the basement didn't exist on any blueprint. We found them behind the morgue's false wall, hidden by a rolling shelf that scraped back on its own when we approached, metal wheels shrieking across tile. The air down there didn't feel like air. It clung to the skin like wet cloth, thick and vibrating with a low hum that seemed to crawl through our bones rather than around us. It smelled faintly metallic, like old blood or copper left out in the rain. Torres hesitated at the top step, flashlight shaking slightly in his grip. I didn't blame him. The walls were too smooth, too perfect, almost like they'd been poured yesterday, as if someone had been maintaining this part of Ashfield Memorial while the rest of it rotted. We went down, each step slower than the last. The stairs didn't creak underfoot, but they groaned in a way that felt personal, like the building resented our movement, like it remembered being sealed and hated being disturbed. The stairwell led to a corridor lined with long rectangular windows, fogged over from the inside. They looked into what appeared to be patient observation rooms, empty at first glance. But if you stared long enough, you saw it. Flickers of movement, shivers in the dark, shadows that paused just long enough to realize you were watching. I caught one staring back. A tall woman, jaw distended, teeth impossibly long. A hospital gown fluttered against her skinless arms. She didn't blink. When I stepped closer, she was gone. At the corridor's end stood a door marked with a single brass plate. Timekeeping. No department code, no locks or keypad, just a handle, gleaming like it had been polished daily. I opened it. The dark inside wasn't just an absence of light. It was a volume, a presence. Our flashlight struggled, beams swallowed in inches. Slowly, shapes emerged. Clocks. Dozens of them. Grandfather clocks leaning like drunk sentinels. Digital alarms blinking blank screens. Pocket watches suspended by rusted chains from the ceiling. All of them dead. All of them set to 2:13. Torres finally spoke. "Why that time?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not before the grinding started. It sounded like gears turning underwater, thick and wet. The walls behind the clocks trembled, and one by one, the digital displays sparked to life, casting green glows onto the stone floor. And then they began to move. Not forward. Backward. Fast at first, then slowing, like winding towards something ancient. The far wall cracked. A jagged seam opened, releasing a gush of warm air laced with ozone and something older, something fungal. The stone shifted inward, revealing a narrow passage pulsing with dull, reddish light. We didn't speak. We didn't decide. We just stepped through. What lay beyond wasn't hospital architecture. The space was impossibly vast, its walls made of ancient stone, etched with looping, unreadable scripts. In the center, beneath an array of hanging lights that didn't cast shadows, stood a glass column. Inside, floating without wires, was the rotary phone. The same one from room 316, receiver slightly off the hook, its cord hanging like a severed artery. Beneath the glass was a patient file. This time, the name read, Officer A. Torres. He froze. I watched his lips move as he read silently. Admitted July 17th, 1995. Psychotic breaks, recurrent auditory hallucinations, temporal regression episodes. Subject believes he is a law enforcement officer responding to a call. His photo was inside. Same face, same badge. But the eyes in the image weren't his. They were mine, or close enough to unsettle something deep. I was never committed, he whispered. This isn't real. I remember my life, my job, He stopped, turned pale. Wait, who was my partner before you? Before I could answer, the phone rang. Once, then again, then a third time, each chime warping the air like sound waves becoming solid. The glass case cracked from the inside. Clocks on the surrounding walls sped up, 2:12, 2:11. I grabbed Torres. We turned, but the corridor was gone. Only a blank wall, smooth and silent. The sound of ticking grew louder, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. Time was hemorrhaging. The sigils on the stone floor pulsed in rhythm with the countdown. And then the clocks began to chant. Not in voices, but in tone. Discordant, rising, layered until our thoughts felt stretched thin like worn tape. We weren't in Ashfield anymore. We were inside the hour it never survived. And we weren't alone. We went back down the elevator. We didn't press anything. It just moved. The panel glowed dimly as the red light above 1995 flickered out, and a new one lit up. 2:13. There was no floor for that. No button. Just the time. Like a frozen hour we were descending into. The deeper it carried us, the more the air thickened. It became hard to think. Memories stuttered and bled together. I forgot who Torres was for a full minute. Then I forgot who I was. When the doors finally opened, the hallway was impossible. Too narrow and too long, like it bent around the inside of a spiral. The walls pulsed, breathing in slow rhythms. Every 20 feet or so, there was a door. We opened none of them. They weren't meant for us. We just walked. Torres tried to hum something, maybe to anchor himself, but the sound came out wrong, backwards, like a tape in reverse. I told him to stop. At the end of the corridor was a window. Behind it, a control room. Dozens of rotary phones mounted to the walls, all of them off the hook, cords swinging like pendulums. Monitors displayed footage from rooms we hadn't seen, some still showing us. From behind, from above. Some looked like security feeds. Others were much older, grainy, black and white film reels. One showed a nurse injecting something into my arm. Another showed Torres in a straitjacket, screaming in total silence. A speaker crackled. A voice, mine but strained and older, came through. Answer it. I turned. One of the phones in the control room was lit. I shouldn't have picked it up, but I did. The voice on the other end was my mother's. She'd been dead for 10 years. She was crying, whispering that she was proud, that she was scared, that she was waiting for me to come home. Then the line clicked, and the voice shifted. Now it was Torres, but not the one next to me. This one was begging, screaming, pleading not to be erased. It's not me down there, he said. I'm still in the stairwell. You never made it back. None of us did. The line went dead. I turned around. The corridor was gone. Torres was gone. I was standing alone in the middle of room 316, as it had been that first night. Dusty, abandoned, moonlight cutting through the broken blinds. But the phone was still warm. And carved into the wall, again and again, it's still 2:13. I left the room. Downstairs, everything was back to the way it had been. collapsed furniture, shattered glass, doors boarded. My patrol car was outside, coated in weeks of dust. I got in and drove. I don't remember the route, I just remember that the sun didn't rise. Back at the station, no one remembered dispatching us. There was no record of the call. Torres never existed. There was no Officer Torres in the department, never had been. But every night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the phone on my desk rings once, and I never pick it up. End of story. Story 4, Echo Park Station. There's a platform beneath Echo Park that isn't listed on any transit maps. You won't find it by accident. You'll only reach it if you board the last southbound train on a Tuesday after 2:40 a.m. and stay on past the final stop. The lights in the car will flicker once, then twice, and no announcement will play. The train won't slow. It just glides into a place it shouldn't be able to reach. That's how we found it. Or rather, that's how it found us. We got the call a few days ago. A maintenance worker, Alan Drew, never returned from his overnight shift. They found his gear, vest, gloves, ID, flashlight, neatly stacked inside the terminal's locked control room. Security footage showed him walking down into Tunnel B and never coming back up. At the exact moment he vanished from camera, the monitors all glitched, just static, then a freeze frame of empty tracks. That frame held for 13 minutes. The department sent us, myself and Ramirez, to investigate. Not an official dispatch. Just two night shift detectives with too much curiosity and not enough sense. We took our badges, our flashlights, and a thermal reader borrowed from Search and Rescue. We figured we'd be in and out in under an hour. At 2:42 a.m., we boarded the last southbound train out of Echo Park. There were no passengers, no conductor we could see. We didn't question it. Somewhere between Lincoln Station and the end of the line, the train dipped into a tunnel I didn't recognize. The lights flickered, once, twice, and then we stopped. Not a real station, not even close. Just a platform carved directly into the wall, uneven, unpainted, ancient-looking stone instead of concrete. Black water dripped from the ceiling. There were no signs, no ads. Just a single rusted bench and an old emergency phone box bolted into the wall. The train doors opened with a hiss, but no chime. Ramirez and I stepped out. The air was colder here, metallic and wet. The platform extended only a few feet past the train before fading into absolute black. The flashlight beams didn't go far. The shadows swallowed the light like water. Ramirez tried the radio. Static, the train doors closed behind us. That's when we heard it. Not footsteps, not breathing. Something else, like whispering, only deeper, older, and coming from inside the tracks. We weren't alone down there, and we weren't the first to step off at the Echo Park station that doesn't exist. The whispering didn't stop. It slid between the walls, underneath the tracks, behind the dark. It never got louder. It just kept moving, circling us like a slow current. Ramirez stayed close, eyes darting to every flicker of movement that might have been shadow or breath or something worse. Our radios were useless. I tried mine 3 times and got nothing but a low hum, like someone drawing in air right against my ear. The emergency phone on the platform wall was caked in rust and something sticky. I picked up the receiver anyway. It was already off the hook. Inside the tunnel, maybe 15 yards out, we found the first sign that Drew had ever been there. His name badge, bent and wet, stuck to the wall like it had been absorbed by the stone. His flashlight lay a few feet farther, shattered down the middle, but the bulb was still glowing, pale blue instead of white. Not LED, not anything I recognized. We kept moving. There were no lights in the tunnel itself, just long stretches of pitch broken by patches of faint bioluminescence. Moss or mold or something growing where nothing should live. Ramirez spotted markings etched into the stone walls. Not graffiti, not words. They looked like maps carved with broken glass, concentric circles, straight lines that crossed and folded over themselves, symbols that burned after you looked away. Then we heard the train again. Not the one we arrived on. A different one. Slow, heavy, no headlights. Just the deep rumble of iron wheels grinding against wet track. We pressed ourselves against the wall, but nothing passed. The sound came and went, like it moved through some space just beside ours. Ramirez whispered, "We're under something." But I think he knew, like I did, that we weren't under anything. We were between. The tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber, a hollowed-out cathedral of rock and steel. Dozens of abandoned platforms stretched out in all directions, each with tracks that went nowhere, each with their own architecture, like they were built in different decades. Some had tiled walls, others were covered in wood paneling or rusted rebar. A few glowed faintly, as if remembering electricity, and at the center of the space was a pit, square, black, silent. Something hung above it, a harness, an old elevator mechanism stripped of its cab, just the cables, still swaying. I don't know why, but I stepped toward it. My hand brushed the nearest railing and the whispering stopped. All of it. The silence hit so hard it felt like I'd gone deaf. Then something from the pit reached out. Not a hand, not a figure, just a pull, like gravity with intent. My stomach lurched. Ramirez grabbed my arm and yanked me back. We stumbled into the light of our flashlights again, and the tunnel behind us was gone. Just smooth wall, like the stone had never been carved. We were sealed in. And the train that brought us here hadn't come to drop us off. It came to feed the place. The tunnel beyond the platform had no lights. Our flashlights barely pushed back the dark, and what little they revealed didn't make sense. The walls looked carved, not poured, chiseled from stone by hand, with uneven grooves running in spirals that made our eyes ache if we stared too long. Ramirez kept pace beside me, but neither of us spoke. Talking felt wrong here, like the air was listening. Every 20 feet or so, the tracks would split, branching into other tunnels, some narrower, some jagged like cracked bone. We stayed straight, trying to keep a line. The thermal reader stopped working 5 minutes in, blinking out and then rebooting to display all zeros. It was registering nothing, not heat, not cold, not us. We should have turned back, but the air behind us felt heavier than the air ahead. It was as if the tunnel was breathing us in, one step at a time. Then we heard the scratching. Not loud, just a dry, rhythmic rasp, like something dragging across stone. We froze. The sound came from one of the side tunnels, about 10 feet away. I raised my flashlight. Empty. Ramirez raised his sidearm. "Whatever's down here," he whispered, "it's not alone." We kept going. The tunnel began to slope downward. Subtle at first, then steeper. The incline so gradual we didn't notice until we turned and realized the platform was no longer visible. There was only black behind us. Our radios crackled once, then died again. We found the first sign of Drew about 20 minutes later. A maintenance vest, ripped down the middle, hung over a pipe like it had been displayed. Below it, a boot with the toe torn clean off. There was no blood, no scuff marks. Just that soft whispering again. Stronger now, and layered. Like multiple voices speaking at once in a language I didn't know, but almost understood. Another 50 feet in, we hit the chamber. It was a wide open space, circular and domed, too perfect to be natural. The ceiling rose 20 feet high and was etched with more spirals, deeper here, cut with tools or claws or something far more deliberate. In the center was a rail car, old, rusted through, covered in soot. No numbers, no logos, just a thin red handprint smeared across its door. The door was open. Inside, it was pristine. No rust, no soot, just rows of old seats, still upholstered in green velvet. The lights flickered on as we stepped inside. Ramirez reached out to touch the nearest seat and then froze. "They're warm," he said. "Still warm." Then the door slammed shut behind us. We were moving. But the railcar wasn't on tracks. We were floating, sliding through a tunnel that wasn't stone or steel, but something that looked like the inside of a throat, pulsing with soft light. Our radios buzzed again, but this time with sound. A voice, flat, mechanical. Not the trains, not human. "Do not exit while in transit." We had no idea where it was taking us, but deep down, I think we both already knew. We weren't going to be brought back the same. We followed the rails. It was the only direction left. The stone platform behind us had vanished, swallowed whole by darkness. Ramirez checked her watch every few minutes, but the hands hadn't moved since we stepped off the train. Mine was the same. No signal, no time, just a growing hum beneath our boots, like the tracks themselves were breathing. The tunnel curved in on itself like intestines. The walls sweated condensation, streaked with rust-colored veins. Sometimes it looked like paint, other times, blood. The flashlight flickered again, weaker this time. The batteries were new. Everything we brought down here had started to betray us. The whispering came and went, always just out of reach. It wasn't random. There was rhythm to it, a pattern. Ramirez noticed it first. 3 syllables. Pause. 4 syllables. Repeat. Her voice cracked in the damp, like it's calling something. We came to a service alcove marked with a symbol I'd never seen before. A circle within a triangle, drawn in ash. Inside, we found the remnants of gear. A jacket with the Echo Park MTA patch, a broken radio, 3 sets of boots. No bodies. Just a wall of Polaroids taped above an old fuse box. Every photo showed a different person standing on the platform, all of them looking directly at the camera. Some were smiling, some crying. One was Ramirez. She stared at it for a long time. "That's not me," she said. But her hands were shaking. The air shifted, warmer now, thick, hard to breathe. That's when the lights came on. Pale amber fluorescence buzzed to life, flickering one after another, revealing that we weren't in a tunnel anymore. We stood inside a wide underground terminal, arches of stone and bone, tiled with names carved into the walls, names scratched out. Above us, a sign read, "Transfer pending." A train was arriving. We hadn't heard it until it was already pulling in. No lights on the front. Just a long, groaning crawl of metal. Its windows were black. Its doors opened without a sound. Ramirez looked at me. "We don't get a choice, do we?" "No," I said. Because I knew this was the same train we took to get here. And it had finally come back to collect us. The emergency phone on the wall began to ring. It wasn't supposed to. The cord was cut. The box had rusted shut. But the ringing was sharp and steady, echoing through the stone like it had been waiting years to be answered. Ramirez stepped toward it, slowly, like he was caught in its gravity. I grabbed his shoulder to stop him, but he didn't react. His pupils had dilated, swallowing almost all the color from his eyes. "Don't," I said. But my voice sounded distant, buried under something low and humming. The platform behind us had changed. The tracks were gone. In their place, a black drop-off stretched forever downward. On the far wall, something pulsed. An opening, like a mouth slowly widening. Whispered voices spilled out of it, chanting in unison. I recognized one. It was mine. A perfect echo of something I'd never said. The lights from our flashlights dimmed, flickered, and died. But the emergency phone kept ringing. Ramirez picked it up. He didn't speak, he just listened. And as he did, something began to rise from the tracks, or what used to be tracks. A shape made of shifting shadows, impossibly tall, cloaked in wet metallic glimmers like the underside of the Earth's skin. It didn't have a face, just a dozen human mouths, all whispering at once. Ramirez began to repeat what he was hearing. It was never a station. It's a throat. It's been swallowing us piece by piece. I tried to move. My legs wouldn't respond. My fingers had turned ice cold, locked in place. The darkness was folding inward, compressing. I saw the bench, the walls, the ceiling, all dissolving into black fog. The only thing untouched was the phone box and Ramirez. Then the shadow turned toward me. I don't remember screaming, but I know I did. The next thing I remember, I was on the floor of an active train. Crowded, daylight outside, passengers all around me, unaware. The doors dinged and opened at Lincoln Station. Ramirez was gone. So was the phone. So was my badge. I asked the conductor how long I'd been on the train. He looked confused. Said he'd just seen me board at the last stop. There was no last stop. There never is. Because Echo Park Station isn't on the map. But once it knows your name, it doesn't need to be.